During one summer, when I was around 12 years old, my family and I were staying at a hotel in a big city to visit our extended family. Despite having the option to stay with them, we chose the hotel instead. As the older sibling, I was usually responsible for looking after my younger brother. Upon our arrival, my mom asked me to keep an eye on him while she handled the check-in process. We settled down on the lobby couch, facing the hotel doors. A man in his mid-40s entered the hotel, and although he seemed ordinary, I found it odd that he didn't go to the front desk immediately. This made me a little uncomfortable as I thought he might have followed us. Fortunately, my mom called us over, and we went to our room after receiving the room card. Later that day, we returned to the hotel after visiting family, and my mom suggested that we all go swimming in the hotel pool. We changed and went to the pool, only to be surprised when the Sane Man walked in and sat down. It was clear that he wasn't there to swim, and my mom seemed worried about his presence. She pointed him out to me and said if he didn't leave within 5 minutes, we would have to go back to our rooms. When he didn't leave, we gathered our things and departed. Back in our room, my mom was a bit on edge, and I also started to feel uneasy, especially since the man seemed to be watching us. During a movie halfway through the evening, my mom went to take a shower. Just then, there was a knock on the door, and a person with a high-pitched voice claimed to be from housekeeping. I thought it was odd for them to come so late, but we needed a towel, so I opened the door. To my shock, it was the same creepy man from before. He smiled and waved at me, and I froze with fear, imagining the worst possible scenarios. Thankfully, my mom came out of the shower, saw the man, and quickly pulled me back into the room, slamming the door shut and locking it. She called the front desk to report the man's presence, but I suggested she call the police instead. However, she decided to switch rooms instead, and at that moment, we heard footsteps receding down the hallway away from our room. The man had left. We promptly switched rooms and didn't encounter him again during our stay. In the 1960s, my next-door neighbor's parents, having retired, moved from India to the UK. They formed a tradition of visiting their home country annually to reconnect with family and friends, spending equal time traveling through India and their UK residence. When I was 15, my neighbor's family invited mine to join them on one of these trips. At that time, I considered myself a hardcore Viking rock prince, with my long blonde hair and red kerang. Unfortunately, my curly hair had other plans, and I ended up looking like a cherub instead. Regardless, I was excited to embark on this adventure, even if it meant being mistaken for a girl on occasion. My neighbor's dad had planned this holiday with military precision. As we arrived in India, he distributed brown folders to each of us, including my 11-year-old brother and sister. These folders contained detailed itineraries, hotel brochures, money conversion charts, times tables, 4 passport photos of ourselves for forms, and a list of contacts under the header Useful People. Suddenly, I transformed from a Viking rock prince into James Bond, ready to face any challenge. During our trip, I had numerous hilarious encounters due to my appearance. Once, a relative of my neighbor questioned my mother about letting me dress like a boy and offered to fit me with a sari. Despite these moments, I enjoyed the journey immensely until we arrived at a massive, isolated hotel deep in the jungle. This hotel was located in the absolute middle of nowhere, and the nearest village was a 3-hour drive down a dirt road. The moment we arrived, we noticed that it seemed under new management. The hotel was eerily deserted, with only a single light on about 5 stories up. As we pulled into the driveway, we spotted a group of men gathered around a large fire. One of them started shouting, but was silenced by a swift slap from another man. An intimidating figure, whom I likened to an Indian drug lord with an Alfred Hitchcock flair, approached our vehicle and welcomed us to the hotel. He checked our reservations and led us to the lobby, which was as deserted as the rest of the place. Chairs were toppled, and the atmosphere was eerie. Hitchcock informed us that our rooms weren't ready yet, despite it being 9 p.m., and offered us food in the huge, empty dining room. A young boy, no older than 9, took our orders and vanished. An hour later, a haphazardly assembled assortment of food arrived on mismatched dinnerware. The whole situation was unnerving, and we tried to make light of it with jokes to ease the tension. We reasoned that we were only there for one night, everything was prepaid, and we were a large group with 2 Hindi speakers, so we felt safe enough to handle any oddities. Hitchcock eventually took us to our rooms, and each one was sparsely furnished with exposed wires poking out of the walls where a TV or phone should be. The only decoration was a creepy little metal horse sitting on a bedside table. I shared a room with my little brother, and I insisted on sleeping closer to the door, hoping I could summon Thor if needed. Hitchcock lingered at the doorway, giving me unsettling looks, but I closed the door and tried to settle down for the night. In the middle of the night, I awoke to the sound of my door clicking shut, just inches from my head. My heart raced, and I cowered under the blankets until the fear subsided. When I finally gathered the courage to check, the door was unlocked, and my little brother was fine. Our bags were undisturbed, but I noticed that my passport photo was missing from the folder. Terrified, I explained the situation to my family, and they revealed that they had also heard someone outside their doors during the night, but had bolted them shut before sleeping. The realization dawned on us that Hitchcock had intentionally put us in that specific room. Our driver suggested we return to the hotel and demand answers and compensation. When we reached the hotel, it was padlocked, and Hitchcock and his cronies were nowhere to be found. Even the little metal horse had been left on the doorstep. Feeling angry and defeated, we left the place with a strange souvenir and an unforgettable story to tell. In conclusion, my journey to India was filled with bizarre and unforgettable experiences. Despite the strange events, I still cherish the memories, but I can't deny that the trip had its fair share of hair-raising moments. Whether you decide to travel to India or not, I advise you to approach every adventure with an open mind and a sense of humor. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. My girlfriend and I decided to stay at a cheap motel for 2 nights, despite it not being in the best area. On the first night, everything seemed fine. We were both young, me being 20 and she just 19 at the time, and the affordability of the place was appealing, making it work for our tight budget. However, the second night took a strange and terrifying turn. It was around midnight when we were suddenly jolted awake by loud banging on our door. Curious and concerned, I peeked through the peephole, only to find a disheveled-looking white man standing outside, shirtless, and acting erratically. My immediate thought was that he might be under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and perhaps he was banging on everyone's door for some inexplicable reason. Still, it was unsettling to say the least. I tried to shake off the unease and convince myself that it was nothing more than a strange occurrence, but around 2 a.m., as my girlfriend and I were starting to drift back to sleep, I thought I heard him say something chilling. "You and your girl are gonna die tonight." I desperately tried to dismiss it, questioning why a random stranger would say something so terrifying. How did he even know that I had a girl with me in the room? Had he been watching us earlier? These thoughts raced through my mind while Jane, my girlfriend, peacefully slept beside me. I didn't want to disturb her sleep, but my nervousness grew, so I gently nudged her awake and whispered, "I think that guy is still outside." In her half-asleep state, Jane dismissed my concerns, thinking I was just being paranoid. But then, he started knocking on her door again, and this time, we were both alarmed. We decided to look through the peephole together, and to our horror, he was standing right in front of our door, but looking the opposite direction, as if he were on guard, with his hands behind his back in a somewhat militaristic posture. This was enough to push us into action. I picked up the motel phone and called the police, explaining the situation and urging them to come as quickly as possible. Jane thought I might be overreacting, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread. In parallel, I also informed the motel's lobby, hoping they could assist, but they were unhelpful and suggested I should rely solely on the police. About 10 minutes later, a police cruiser arrived in the parking lot. I felt some relief, thinking they would handle the situation, but to my frustration, they left without apparently spotting the man. Despite their departure, the man continued his bizarre and threatening behavior outside, shouting things like, "You call the cops. You're just a freaking baby. I'm gonna beat you to death." The ominous threats only intensified our fear. This time, Jane took the initiative and insisted on calling the police herself. Her voice was tremulous and desperate on the phone, conveying the necessary sense of urgency that I, in my state of anxiety, was unable to muster before. Thankfully, a police cruiser returned, and this time, we heard the sound of handcuffs being applied outside our room. Relief washed over us as we realized that the man was finally being apprehended. We weren't sure why it took multiple calls for the authorities to act, but we were grateful that they eventually did. After the police left, my girlfriend and I decided we couldn't stay at the motel any longer. The fear was too overwhelming. It was 4 a.m., but fortunately, I had a friend who was awake and willing to let us stay at his house for the rest of the night. As we drove away from the motel, I glanced back, and in the glow of the police car's lights, I could see the man in the back seat, staring at me with the most dead and soulless eyes I had ever encountered. The events of that night left us shaken and haunted, but we were thankful to be safe, away from that chilling stranger and the unnerving motel experience. When I was around 16 years old, I went on a trip to Cabo San Lucas with my family and best friend. My friend and I were thrilled because we had our own hotel room for the trip. One afternoon, while getting on the elevator, a security guard joined me. As the elevator ascended, he looked at me and asked if I had been wearing a green skirt on the beach the other day. I confirmed that I had indeed worn it, feeling uncomfortable that he mentioned my outfit from a few days back. Later, when it was 4 a.m., I suddenly woke up to find a man standing silently at the foot of my bed. It was the same security guard from the elevator, still in his uniform. Startled, I asked him what he was doing there, and he stammered something about my door not being properly locked, and then quickly left the room. I was still groggy from sleep and didn't fully comprehend the situation at first. But soon after he left, I realized that my covers were pulled back, and I was lying on my back with the sheets around my ankles. This was unusual because I typically sleep nude, but never kick off the covers in my sleep due to feeling cold and having the AC on full blast. It dawned on me that his actions might have woken me up. I shudder to think about what could have happened if my friend hadn't been sleeping in the next bed. Unfortunately, during the elevator encounter, I had been creeped out and avoided making eye contact with the guard, and the room was so dark that I couldn't have identified him. As a result, I never reported the incident to the hotel, and it's a decision that I still regret years later. As a woman, I find myself looking back at the unsettling story and recognizing every mistake I made during the encounter, which leaves me feeling horrified. However, I also see it as a valuable warning that serves as a reminder to be vigilant and cautious in all aspects of life. Normally, I pride myself on being a very skeptical and aware person, someone who instinctively locks car doors immediately upon getting in, trusts gut feelings, and avoids engaging on the phone while walking in public. Despite these precautions, I was caught off guard last week, and it has left me deeply shaken. It all began when I was on a business trip to Phoenix and decided to stay at an embassy suite, a hotel that I have frequented numerous times without any previous issues. The hotel has always seemed well managed, but this time I couldn't help but notice that it appeared to be lightly staffed. My concerns, however, were overshadowed by the normalcy of my previous stays. Then, one morning at around 6:45 a.m., my hotel room phone rang. Thinking it was the front desk calling for some reason, I innocently picked up the call. On the other end of the line was a man with an undeniably suave, charming, and disarming demeanor. His friendly and amicable approach made it easy for me to engage in the conversation without immediately realizing that something was amiss. The man began leading the conversation down a peculiar path, asking if I was Jenny and dropping subtle hints about a time in Cleveland where someone had an unforgettable experience. Trying to play along, I racked my brain to recall any such encounter, but it all seemed very unlikely. Nevertheless, I remained polite and engaged with the conversation as he skillfully navigated through the call. Eventually, he revealed that he had called the wrong Jenny and apologized for the confusion. Seemingly harmless, the conversation quickly took a turn, becoming flirtatious and intrusive. He started asking personal questions about my appearance, age, city, and marital status, to which, somewhat foolishly, I provided partial answers. I did not feel entirely comfortable, but his charm and skillful maneuvering kept me from ending the call immediately. As the conversation progressed, my intuition began signaling that something was off. I started to sense that he might have ulterior motives beyond a simple wrong number. At that moment, I decided it was best to put an end to the conversation, and promptly hung up. He didn't resist or push back. Instead, the call ended without any further incident. Afterward, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being unsettled and unsafe. How did he manage to get connected to my room without knowing my full name? The fact that he could only guess my first name, Jenny, and then craft a plausible story about the last name raised alarming questions. Was he lurking and waiting for an opportunity to strike? To my astonishment, my concerns were validated when another woman nearby recounted a similar experience. She had received a call looking for a person named Sarah Miller, while her name was also Sarah. Fortunately, she did not engage much in the conversation, but the eerie similarities between our stories intensified my unease. I couldn't help but ponder the intentions of the man on the other end of the line. I considered a few possibilities. Firstly, he might have been looking for someone willing to engage in explicit phone talk for personal gratification, but he never made his intentions explicit enough. Secondly, it appeared as though he was trying to find someone to meet in person, using a flirty approach as a disguise. This thought left me feeling genuinely alarmed, contemplating the potential danger associated with such encounters. I tried to find similar stories online, hoping to gain some insight or assurance that this was an isolated incident. However, my searches yielded nothing specific except for information about the front desk scam, where individuals pose as hotel staff to obtain credit card information. As someone who prides myself on maintaining a skeptical and cautious attitude, I am deeply disturbed by how easily I let my guard down during this conversation. My friends were equally shocked when I shared the story with them, as I am usually the last person they would expect to fall for such a situation. Reflecting on the encounter, I am still trying to figure out what this man's intentions were. It is difficult to ignore the possibility of potentially dangerous scenarios, but it is also plausible that he was merely a lonely person looking for a date, albeit through deceptive means. The entire incident has left me shaken and has served as a poignant reminder to stay vigilant, even in seemingly safe environments. I hope that sharing this story will raise awareness and caution among others, reminding us all to trust our instincts and never underestimate the importance of personal security. During my aunt's tenure as the general manager of a fairly busy hotel in the Sacramento, California area, she encountered one of the most unsettling incidents. On an otherwise ordinary and quiet weeknight, a guest called the front desk claiming that someone had been sent by the hotel to check on her air conditioning. According to the maintenance worker, he needed to enter her room to fix the AC. Suspicious of this sudden visit, the guest grew uneasy and decided to verify with the front desk if the hotel had indeed sent someone. Upon contacting the front desk, the attentive attendant immediately advised the guest to lock her doors securely and called for security assistance. Security personnel promptly rushed to her room, but to their surprise, the mysterious man had vanished. The guest recounted her evening as relatively uneventful. She had enjoyed dinner, returned to the hotel, and relaxed in the hot tub for a while before going back to her room. Approximately 20 minutes later, the man knocked on her door. Determined to unravel the mystery, the hotel staff reviewed the security footage. They discovered a chilling sequence of events: the guest sitting alone in the hot tub, followed by her departure from the tub. Around 10 seconds after she left, a man emerged stealthily from behind nearby bushes and headed in the same direction as her. Despite their best efforts, the hotel staff couldn't identify or locate the suspicious individual. Thankfully, no further reports of fake handymen occurred after this eerie incident. The hotel's vigilance and prompt action had successfully averted a potential danger, leaving guests with an increased sense of security during their stay. About 2 years ago, when I was 17, I experienced a rather unsettling incident during a holiday with my mom in South Africa. We were staying in Cape Town for a few nights before heading back to Australia. My mom had always shared eerie stories from her childhood in South Africa, so I was already on edge. One morning, I went down to the breakfast buffet a bit later than usual. My mom was about to head back upstairs to pack, and since it was a nice hotel with plenty of staff around, she wasn't concerned about leaving me alone. As I ate, I noticed an Indian woman, approximately 40 years old, sitting nearby and observing me. Although not overly strange, it lingered in the back of my mind. After finishing my meal, I headed towards the elevator, and oddly, the woman followed suit. Inside the elevator, I pressed the button for my floor, while she didn't select any floor. I didn't think much of it then, and as the doors closed, she struck up a conversation, asking about my origin and age. Her English seemed limited, and I replied that I was 17 and from Australia. She mentioned her brother lived there. Upon reaching my floor, I was eager to exit and escape her friendly but unsettling questions. However, she persisted and suggested I visit her room. She pointed to a room on my left, with an open door. Curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced inside. To my horror, there was a man in the room, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at the woman, and then at me. My gut instinct screamed at me to run, so I bolted to my room without hesitation. Luckily, they didn't chase after me, and I reached my room safely. I briefly mentioned the incident to my mom when she asked why I was out of breath, but I didn't delve into the full details at that time, such as noticing the woman at breakfast or her not pressing a button in the elevator. Looking back, those details added to my suspicion. I shudder to think what could have happened if I hadn't been cautious from the beginning, or if I had entered that room. I am certain it would have been an incredibly dangerous situation. Tonight, an unsettling incident occurred involving my wife while I'm here at a McDonald's parking lot, just 3 blocks away from the police station where she is giving her statement. She works at the front desk of a busy hotel, catering mostly to business types, and her shifts usually run until 11 or midnight. I am usually there with her, not entirely out of altruism, but to enjoy the Wi-Fi, coffee, and TV. About 3 weeks ago, while I was at the hotel watching an episode of Justified, I encountered a fellow who was a long-term guest. I didn't catch his name, and he left a negative impression on me. He interrupted my show, and his behavior was quite erratic, with a cast on his hand claiming he had hit a wall. He talked about 2012 prophecies and fundamentalist Christianity, boasting about being sober from alcohol for 36 months while heavily relying on pills. It was evident that he had some serious issues, and last week, he required an ambulance due to an overdose. Tonight, he called down to my wife and demanded she call the police. When she asked if anyone was hurt, he cryptically replied that someone would be in about 90 seconds. My wife complied and called the cops, but I was not there this time. I learned about the incident when she later recounted it to me while waiting for her interview with the police. In the midst of this chaos, the man went down to the dining room with a gun. The assistant manager went out to confront him, followed by my wife a few minutes later. The assistant manager ended up on the floor with the man holding the gun over him. When he spotted my wife, he turned the gun towards her. On Monday, the hotel manager expressed his desire not to have me around all the time, not for personal reasons, but to avoid discomforting the guests. That's why I wasn't there during the incident. I was out with some friends. The man continued pointing the gun at my wife, while something distracted him momentarily. Seizing the opportunity, she moved behind a wall for safety. Soon, the police arrived in significant numbers, and amidst the commotion, she heard the man yelling, followed by a gunshot. Uncertain of who pulled the trigger first, she found herself in a terrifying and dangerous situation. During my college days, I worked at a Holiday Inn in Omaha, Nebraska. Typically, I was a bellman, but occasionally, I filled in at the front desk. One day, an unusual-looking man approached the front desk. He was dressed in a peculiar 1970s fashion, resembling a creepier version of Dan from the Good Guys TV show. He sported aviators, greasy hair, a receding hairline, and a mustache. Walking with a severe limp, he leaned on a cane. He asked me where he could find paramedic patches, claiming he was in town for a special assignment related to paramedic duties. Strangely, he said he had to provide his own patches. The situation struck me as odd, so I informed him that I didn't know where to buy them, and he eventually left. Later on, I received a call to check the hot water in a guest's room. When I knocked on the door, an elderly lady in a nightgown answered. She didn't respond to my introduction and remained motionless, with her mouth agape, giving the impression of someone who had undergone a lobotomy. I noticed motionless legs on the bed, but decided not to investigate further. I tested the water, and it turned out to be extremely hot. The lady didn't say a word, so I informed her that the hot water was functioning correctly and quickly left the room. To my surprise, the creepy man from earlier returned to the front desk, complaining about his room's hot water. It became apparent that something was off. Reluctantly, I followed him back to his room at a slow pace, considering his reliance on the cane. Upon arriving, I saw the same old lady standing there with her nightgown still open. And now, there was an old man sitting on the bed, also unmoving and expressionless. I explained to the creepy man that I had already checked the water, and it was fine. However, he seemed uninterested in the water issue. Instead, he pulled out a duffel bag and took out a stuffed Bugs Bunny doll. He held it out to me, and as I reached for it, he pulled it back abruptly, conveying a "don't touch it" signal. He offered it to me again, and this time, reluctantly, I tried to grab it, but he withdrew it once more. Throughout this bizarre exchange, the elderly couple continued to stare at us, smiling with their mouths open and making strange laughing sounds. Then he brought out a Donald Duck doll, but this time, I didn't attempt to take it. He persisted in offering it to me, but I refrained from reaching out. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, I slowly backed out of the room, wished them a good stay, and never encountered them again.